You seek knowledge, but you do not know the questions yet.
The readings are impossible, a localized seismic event with no discernible source. And the light, it was almost sentient.
How do I reconcile what I saw with everything I thought I knew? What I discovered changed everything.
The forests of the Cascade Mountains have always held stories, but not everyone dares to venture deep within them. To the local villagers, the forest is alive, not like ordinary woodlands. Giant trees tower overhead, their roots twisting like ancient serpents. And morning fog always seems to shroud the trails, as if trying to hide something. Villagers often warned hikers not to go too far, claiming that unseen creatures roamed where human eyes could not reach. Names like BigFoot or Sasquatch were whispered, describing a towering, hairy being said to inhabit the forest's deepest reaches. Yet for Steve, a 29-year-old young researcher, the forest was not just myth. He lived for the unknown, for uncovering truths humanity had yet to grasp. He carried all the equipment a modern explorer could need: cameras with motion sensors, a GPS device, a notebook, and a satellite radio. Still, he could not ignore the gnawing tension in his stomach. There was something about this forest that felt sentient, as if it was warning him in subtle, intangible ways. That night, Steve decided to pitch his tent in a small clearing near a river. A drizzle had passed in the afternoon, turning the ground slick and muddy, and the sound of the flowing water was louder than usual. He lit a campfire, hoping its warmth and light would chase away the creeping unease. Sitting cross-legged, sipping hot tea, he began documenting his observations from the day. Massive footprints pressed into the wet earth, snapped branches far too large to be broken by human hands, and strange noises echoing from the shadows beyond the trees. As the fire flickered and danced, Steve heard something that made him sit up straight. The snap of a branch, but different, heavy, deep, resonant. It came from the edge of the clearing, beyond the circle of firelight. His heart raced. He grabbed his flashlight, sweeping it over the darkened forest, but all he saw was impenetrable darkness. Every time he heard the sound, it felt like invisible eyes were watching him, eyes that were large, intelligent, and patient. Steve tried to calm himself, reasoning that it must be a nocturnal animal, a deer, a bear, or some other wild creature. But the sound was unlike anything he had ever encountered. There was no ordinary breathing, no pattern like a normal animal's movement. The noise came with a rhythm that mimicked human steps and, most terrifyingly, it stopped precisely when he held his breath. As night deepened, fog rolled in, swallowing the clearing. Shadows of trees danced across his vision, slow and deliberate, almost as if they were reaching toward him. Steve felt that every step he took on the damp earth sounded unnaturally loud, even though he moved as quietly as possible. The forest had become alive, not in a peaceful, tranquil way, but in a menacing, commanding way that forced every human sense into heightened alertness. Suddenly, a deep, heavy exhalation echoed nearby, like wind trapped by something massive. Steve turned, and for a fleeting moment, he glimpsed a tall, hairy silhouette moving swiftly between the trees. His throat went dry, and his heart felt like it had stopped. The figure was indistinct, yet it was enough to make Steve realize that the legend of Bigfoot was not just folklore. Something alive, something enormous and ancient, was present in this forest. Steve tried to stay logical. He raised his camera, hoping to capture evidence, but the lens recorded only fleeting shadows shifting through the tree trunks. He documented every detail. The creature's estimated height, nearly 10 feet tall, its broad, muscular frame, and its movements, silent yet precise. He felt hypnotized by its presence, terrified yet fascinated at the same time. The night stretched endlessly. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves, made Steve flinch. But amidst the fear, curiosity burned brighter than ever. He knew that if he succumbed to panic, he would never uncover the forest's secrets. Yet if he pushed too far, he could put himself in grave danger. As the fog thickened and the night grew darker, The sounds ceased. Silence enveloped the clearing once more. Steve sat close to the fire, trying to calm his racing mind, scribbling his final notes of the night, and staring into the trees that swayed gently in the breeze. He understood one thing clearly. This forest held more than just trees and ordinary animals. There was another presence, Hera being wise beyond human comprehension. And Steve had just begun his journey into its mysterious world. That night, under a moon hidden by mist, Steve stared into the dark forest with a mixture of awe and fear. He knew this was only the beginning. BigFoot was out there, watching. And perhaps, just perhaps, ready to test the courage of a human who dared step into its domain. Dawn broke over the Cascade Mountains, casting a pale light that filtered through the towering trees. The forest, still cloaked in mist, seemed quieter than the night before. Yet Steve felt an unmistakable tension in the air, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. His fire had long since died, leaving only smoldering embers, and the ground beneath him was still damp from the previous day's drizzle. The forest had a way of making even the familiar feel strange and alive, and Steve was keenly aware that he was no longer just an observer. He was now part of something much larger. After packing his gear, Steve set off along the narrow path that led deeper into the forest. His mind replayed the encounter from last night, the shadow, the heavy exhalation, the feeling of unseen eyes tracking his every move. Each memory made his pulse quicken, but it also fueled a growing determination. He had come to document the impossible, and he would not turn back now. Within an hour, Steve's boots sank into soft, wet earth, and he froze. He looked down. There, imprinted in the mud, was a footprint massive, easily twice the size of a human foot. The toes were thick and elongated, the arch deep and pronounced, and the heel pressed firmly into the soil, leaving a clear impression of weight and power. Steve leaned closer, brushing away leaves and small twigs. The print was fresh. The earth had not yet hardened, and the edges were sharp, indicating it had been made recently, perhaps within the last few hours. A shiver ran down his spine. This was no ordinary animal track. Deer, bear, elk, none could leave such a mark. His hands shook slightly as he measured the footprint, noting its length, width, and stride. The pattern repeated itself along the path ahead, each step perfectly aligned, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. The footprints were enormous, nearly a meter long, with deep impressions that suggested a being weighing several 100 pounds. Steve took out his camera, snapping photos from every angle, careful not to disturb the tracks. He recorded notes in his journal. Footprints confirm previous observations. Size and spacing indicate a bipedal creature. Walking pattern deliberate, not panicked or erratic. The logical part of his mind analyzed the data scientifically, while another part, a deeper, instinctive part, thrilled and feared simultaneously. Following the footprints, Steve moved cautiously, aware that each step could alert the creature to his presence. The forest seemed to grow denser the further he went, the trees forming natural walls that channeled him along the trail. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of broken branches and disturbed underbrush, signs of something large moving through the forest. Methodical, almost like it knew he was watching. Hours passed, and the trail led him to a small clearing near a stream. Here, the footprints abruptly stopped. Steve knelt to examine the last print. It was deeper than the others, as if the creature had paused, planted its full weight, and then vanished. The stream reflected the early sunlight, and for a moment, Steve thought he saw a ripple, like a shadow passing just beyond the water's edge. He held his breath, flashlight and camera ready. But there was nothing, only the sound of water trickling over rocks and the distant calls of birds. Steve's mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps the creature had taken to the trees, moving silently above him, or perhaps it had doubled back. Observing from a distance, the evidence suggested intelligence, not randomness. This was not a mindless animal. It was calculating, aware, and aware of him. He scribbled furiously in his journal. Behavior indicates intentional concealment. Creature demonstrates extraordinary awareness of surroundings, likely capable of camouflage or blending into environment. Despite the fear, curiosity propelled him forward. He stepped carefully along the edges of the clearing, scanning for any sign of movement. Shadows danced across the forest floor, elongated and distorted by the morning light filtering through the canopy. Each shadow seemed to whisper secrets he could not yet understand. He realized that the forest was no longer a backdrop for his research, was an active participant, testing him, teasing him, drawing him deeper into its mysteries. By mid-morning, Steve discovered another series of prints along a moss-covered ridge, leading uphill. These footprints were accompanied by deep gouges in the soft soil, as if the creature had used its hands to push itself up over the incline. Steve noted the remarkable symmetry of the movement, balanced, powerful, almost elegant despite the creature's massive size. He paused to photograph, measure, and record, every nerve in his body alert to the slightest rustle or shift in the trees. As he climbed, Steve's mind drifted back to last night, to the eyes he had glimpsed in the darkness. The same intelligence now seemed to resonate through the footprints. It was as if the creature had known he would follow, leaving just enough evidence to guide him without revealing itself fully. The realization sent chills down his spine. This was not merely an animal. It was a sentient guardian of the forest, testing intruders, maintaining a balance he could barely comprehend. Steve pressed on, determined yet cautious. The forest seemed endless, and each step carried him further from the world he knew. The footprints continued in a winding path, disappearing and reappearing like riddles in the mud. He realized he was no longer just documenting a legend, he was part of a story that had unfolded for centuries. A story of shadows, footprints, and the unseen life that thrived beyond human understanding. By noon, he reached a dense grove where the sunlight barely touched the ground. Here the footprints became faint, obscured by layers of fallen leaves and moss. Steve knew he had ventured into territory few humans had ever witnessed. A mix of awe, fear, and exhilaration surged through him. He could feel it, the presence of something massive, patient, and intelligent. Watching him, allowing him passage, yet reminding him that the forest was not his domain. As Steve sat to rest, reviewing the photographs and notes, he realized one undeniable truth. The legend of Bigfoot was real. The creature had left tangible evidence of its existence. But more importantly, it had left a message. Subtle and profound. You are intruding, but I am aware. Respect this forest, or you will regret it. Steve's journey had only just begun. The footprints had guided him deeper into the forest, into a world where every shadow could conceal a guardian, every sound could signal an unseen presence, and every step carried the weight of history. The adventure he had sought was no longer a pursuit of curiosity, was a delicate dance with the unknown. And the forest, alive and watchful, was leading him further into its enigmatic heart. The forest seemed to shift as Steve pressed deeper into its heart. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the ground, curling around tree trunks like ghostly fingers. Each step he took over the mossy soil echoed unnaturally, as if the forest itself amplified his presence, making him acutely aware of every movement. The giant footprints he had been following earlier had begun to fade, obscured by fallen leaves and the subtle rumble of wildlife. Yet Steve sensed he was not alone. The forest felt alive in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. He paused to examine a broken branch leaning against a moss-covered tree. The snap of its splintered wood made him jump, but it was nothing, at least, that's what he told himself. Deep down, he knew the creature that had left the footprints was still nearby, its presence intangible yet undeniable. The hairs on his neck stood on end as a subtle chill passed through him, carried by the damp forest air. He could almost hear it breathing in the shadows. Steve's eyes scanned the forest floor, searching for more tracks, more signs of life, anything that could guide him. Then he noticed movement, a flicker in the corner of his vision, too quick and fluid to be a deer or a fox. He froze, heart pounding, flashlight trained on the area, but the forest offered no clarity. Just shadows and the faint sway of leaves. And yet, there it was again, just a glimpse of dark fur, taller than any human, moving with deliberate, silent precision. He held his breath. The creature's intelligence was palpable, even from a distance. It wasn't panicked, nor curious in a simple way. It was calculating, observing. Steve felt the weight of being watched not by an animal, but by something aware, something older than the forest itself. He reminded himself to stay calm, to focus, but the primal part of his brain screamed caution. Every fiber of his being told him that this was no ordinary encounter. The sunlight began filtering through the canopy, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the forest floor. Steve's mind raced, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had been taught about nature. Bigfoot, if that is indeed what it was not just a myth to be disproven or documented. It was a sentinel, a presence that demanded respect and patience. He could feel its gaze following him, a persistent awareness that no camera or notebook could capture. Suddenly, there was a rustle from above, a movement high in the trees. Steve's gaze snapped upward. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw the outline of a massive, hulking figure perched in the branches, its shape blurred by distance and foliage. He blinked, and it was gone. Yet the feeling of being observed intensified, pressing on him from all directions. Every step he took, every breath, seemed magnified by the knowledge that unseen eyes tracked him relentlessly. He continued along a narrow ridge, where the fog hung like a veil, muffling sound and dampening the forest's usual vitality. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting with the contours of the land, creating the illusion of movement even when none existed. Steve's flashlight trembled in his hands as he scanned the undergrowth, and then there it was. A pair of glowing amber orbs, partially hidden behind a cluster of ferns. They reflected the early sunlight in a way that made them almost hypnotic. Steve froze, unable to look away. The eyes were not those of a predator in panic or fear. They were calm, intelligent, and profoundly aware. The gaze seemed to pierce his very thoughts, weighing his intentions and measuring his presence. He felt an inexplicable connection, a silent communication that transcended language. It was as if the creature knew he had followed its trail deliberately, yet it did not flee. It allowed him to witness its vigilance, testing him silently, almost like a riddle posed by nature itself. For what felt like minutes, Steve and the creature remained locked in this silent standoff. Every instinct in his body screamed to run, yet curiosity and the desire to understand rooted him in place. Slowly, he lowered his camera, realizing that no photograph could ever capture the depth of intelligence he now glimpsed. This was not merely an animal. It was a guardian, a conscious presence that had existed in this forest long before humans had wandered in. The eyes blinked once, and the figure began to retreat. Steve followed cautiously, every step measured, every sound minimized. The forest seemed to contract around him, the mist thickening as if shielding the creature's passage. Yet even as it moved, he felt the awareness of those eyes. Still observing, still calculating, guiding him subtly deeper into the forest's mysteries. Hours later, Steve paused to jot notes in his journal, hands still shaking from adrenaline. He recorded, "Eyes observed me today. Intelligence confirmed. Presence deliberate, aware. This is not a mindless animal. This is a sentient being, guardian of the forest." He paused, taking a deep breath, realizing the weight of what he had witnessed. The footprints had led him here, but it was the eyes that had truly marked the encounter, a silent acknowledgement that he had crossed into territory few humans had ever seen. As the day wore on, Steve pressed onward, moving cautiously along the trail, alert to every rustle, every flicker of movement, every subtle shift in the mist. The forest was alive with the presence of something extraordinary, a being both magnificent and terrifying in its subtle power. He understood that this journey was no longer about documentation alone. It was a delicate negotiation with the unknown, a lesson in humility, patience, and respect. By late afternoon, the eyes were gone, but their impression remained, haunting and profound. Steve could feel the creature's awareness lingering, as if it had evaluated him and decided he might yet be worthy of continuing deeper into its world. And as the mist thickened and shadows lengthened, Steve realized one undeniable truth: the forest was alive, and Bigfoot was watching, always, from the darkness, always testing those who dared to enter its domain. As dusk fell over the Cascade Mountains, the forest seemed to exhale, settling into an eerie stillness that pressed against Steve from all sides. The light dimmed rapidly, filtered through the dense canopy above, casting elongated shadows that danced and stretched across the moss-covered ground. Every sound, each rustle of leaves, the distant trickle of water, the occasional call of a bird, was amplified, sharp, and intimate. Steve could feel the weight of the forest, as if it were a living, sentient entity observing his every movement. He found a small clearing by a narrow stream, and decided it was a suitable place to set up camp for the night. The day's trek had been exhausting, and he needed to rest, but he also knew sleep could be dangerous in this part of the forest. His hands shook slightly as he pitched his tent and gathered kindling for a fire, his mind still racing from the morning's encounter with the glowing eyes. Those amber orbs had penetrated deeper than sight alone. They had reached into his thoughts, weighing his intentions. Once the fire was crackling, Steve sat cross-legged, sipping the warm tea he had brought. He tried to calm his mind, telling himself that he was alone, that the creature had moved on, leaving only footprints and memories behind. Yet deep down, he knew that was unlikely. The forest had a way of keeping its secrets close, and anything that left such deliberate evidence surely remained nearby, hidden in shadow. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker, denser. The mist returned, curling around tree trunks like spectral fingers. Steve's senses were heightened, each snap of a twig, each whisper of wind, making him flinch. And then he heard it, a soft, deliberate crunch of leaves beyond the clearing. Not random, not like an animal foraging, heavy, measured steps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. His heart raced. He raised his flashlight, sweeping it across the darkened trees. Nothing, only the forest, silent and patient. The sound continued, circling the clearing. Steve felt the vibrations through the ground, like the echo of something immense, shifting its weight. Every instinct in his body screamed to flee, yet curiosity, and perhaps foolish bravery, rooted him in place. The footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so profound it pressed on him like a physical force. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, straining to pierce the darkness. Then he saw it, or rather glimpsed it. A massive silhouette, taller than any man, slipped between the trees with uncanny stealth. Its movements were deliberate, almost playful, testing him, gauging his reaction. He froze, unable to breathe, aware that any sudden motion might provoke a response. The creature paused, as if observing him with the same intensity he had seen in those amber eyes earlier. For a fleeting moment, Steve felt an unspoken connection or recognition that he was not merely an intruder, but a participant in a silent dialogue, one that had no words but conveyed meaning with extraordinary clarity. Steve's flashlight trembled in his hands as he attempted to capture a photograph. But the beam only caught brief flashes of dark fur and shadow before the figure disappeared again. It was a presence that defied conventional understanding, blending seamlessly with the forest, yet utterly aware of him. The silence returned, heavier this time, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves. He realized that sound itself was controlled by the creature, could step without disturbing a twig, vanish without a trace, and yet dominate the space with its awareness. Night deepened, and the cold settled into Steve's bones. He huddled closer to the fire, taking careful notes in his journal. Encounter confirmed. Presence deliberate. Movements silent, calculated. Creature aware, intelligent, and capable of observing without being seen. Evidence suggests high cognitive function and strategic thinking. Interaction possible, but extremely risky. Even as he wrote, he felt eyes upon him, as though the forest itself conspired with the creature to remind him of his place. Every sound of the night-wind water, distant animal calls filtered through his heightened perception. A branch snapped far to the east, and Steve instinctively ducked, only to realize it was likely a squirrel or deer. Yet a deep, primal sense told him it was something else entirely. The forest was alive, with a presence he could not see, a being that had mastered the art of observation, patience, and subtle intimidation. He understood now that this night would test his endurance as much as his intellect. Hours passed without any further sign, yet Steve could not shake the feeling of being watched. Every instinct told him that retreat was safe, but his curiosity refused to let him leave. He recalled the footprints, the eyes, the calculated movements. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a creature not merely surviving, but thriving in its domain. It was a guardian, a sentinel of the forest, one that had adapted to human intrusion and remained hidden for centuries. Eventually, exhaustion forced Steve to lie down in his tent, still fully clothed, still alert. The fire burned low, and the mist thickened outside. The forest was quiet, too quiet. He could hear only the rhythmic beating of his own heart, and the occasional whisper of wind through the canopy. Somewhere out there, he knew, the creature watched, waiting for him to sleep, testing the boundaries of his courage and respect. That night, under the dense, starless sky, Steve understood the forest's unspoken lesson. Survival here was not just about strength or knowledge. It was about patience, awareness, and humility. The Bigfoot was real, and it was watching not with malice, but with intent. And as Steve drifted into a restless sleep, he knew that tomorrow, he would follow its trail once more, deeper into the forest's enigmatic heart, where shadows, silence, and unseen eyes governed every step of the way. The morning fog clung to the forest like a shroud, softening the outlines of trees and rocks, turning familiar paths into a maze of gray and green. Steve emerged from his tent, muscles stiff from a night of restless vigilance. The air was damp and cold, carrying the scent of wet earth and moss. The forest seemed even quieter than before, as if holding its breath, waiting for him to move. He carefully packed his gear, mindful of every sound he made. The footprints from the day before had faded into the mud and moss, leaving only faint impressions. Yet Steve felt a presence, a lingering awareness that had not left with the night. It was as if the creature he had glimpsed and felt watching him was still here, just beyond the veil of mist, observing him from a distance. Steve decided to follow a faint trail leading toward a ridge, hoping it might reconnect him with the path of the creature. Every step was deliberate. The forest had already taught him that haste could be dangerous. He moved slowly, ears straining for the slightest sound, eyes scanning the fog-shrouded undergrowth for movement. Even the gentle rustle of leaves set his nerves on edge. And then he saw it. Through the mist, a massive figure emerged, partially obscured by the gray fog. It was tall, much taller than any human, its broad shoulders draped in dark, matted fur that blended seamlessly with the shadows of the trees. Steve froze, hardly daring to breathe. The figure remained still for a moment, seemingly aware of him, measuring him. As though deciding whether to reveal itself fully, its presence radiated intelligence, strength, and an almost mystical patience. Steve slowly raised his camera, but the lens could barely capture the shape. The creature seemed to merge with the mist itself, as though it had been woven into the forest's fabric. Its posture was upright, human-like yet undeniably primal. The creature moved with deliberate grace, stepping carefully over roots and rocks, leaving no trace of the immense weight it carried. Steve's heartbeat pounded in his ears, and he felt both fear and awe in equal measure. The figure paused again, and Steve noticed the eyes glowing faintly in the morning light. Amber and intense, observing him with depth and understanding. These were not the eyes of a mindless animal. They were intelligent, aware, and ancient. Steve realized that the creature was fully conscious of his presence, but it did not flee. Instead, it seemed to invite him to witness, to follow, to respect the space it claimed. As he watched, the creature began to move deeper into the fog, disappearing and reappearing between trees like a phantom. Every movement was calculated, deliberate, almost teasing, as if testing Steve's focus and patience. He realized that this encounter was not accidental. The creature had left footprints, observed him with its eyes, and now, it was leading him through its domain and its terms. Steve followed cautiously, keeping a safe distance, his camera ready to capture any evidence. The mist distorted perception, making distances hard to judge, and shapes shifted in and out of view. Yet the trail was unmistakable. The earth disturbed, branches bent, and a faint scent of something musky and organic in the air. He understood that the creature was aware of him at every step, guiding him deeper into territory few humans had ever ventured. Hours passed. The forest seemed suspended in the mist, timeless and otherworldly. Steve's journal recorded every detail, sighted figure in mist, height estimated over 9 feet, movement deliberate, silent, intelligent. Eyes reflect awareness and cognition. Creature remains undisturbed by human presence, but engagement appears selective. He paused to catch his breath, heart still racing, the fog wrapping around him like a living thing. Suddenly, the creature stopped near a shallow creek. Its head turned slowly, and for a moment, it seemed to stare directly at him. The amber eyes held him in place, communicating silently. Steve felt an overwhelming sense of respect, as if the creature was saying, "You are intruding, but you have observed with care. Proceed." but do not overstep. The intelligence in its gaze was staggering, almost beyond comprehension, a guardian of the forest. Ancient and aware, testing the limits of human curiosity. Then, as if deciding that Steve had proven himself sufficiently cautious, the creature moved again, vanishing into the dense mist. Its disappearance was smooth, effortless, leaving only the faintest disturbance in the underbrush, and a lingering sense of presence. Steve stood motionless for several minutes, absorbing the enormity of what he had witnessed. He knew that he had glimpsed something extraordinary, something that could never be fully captured in photographs or words. The forest seemed to return to its usual quiet, but Steve understood that this was an illusion. BigFoot, or whatever this creature truly was still there, watching from the shadows, aware of every move, every thought. The mist was its veil, the forest its domain, and he had entered it with nothing but caution and reverence. As the day progressed, Steve continued to follow the trail left by the creature, every step measured, every sound observed. He felt a growing connection, not of friendship, but of understanding, a silent recognition of boundaries and respect between species. The footprints, the eyes, the calculated movements all told a story of intelligence and vigilance, a story Steve was now a part of. By late afternoon, the mist began to thin, revealing more of the forest and the intricate landscape the creature called home. Steve knew he had only scratched the surface of this mysterious world. Every tree, every shadow, every whisper of movement carried the presence of something greater. Something watching, always. The encounter in the mist had changed him. He would never view the forest, or its secrets, the same way again. Steve understood one undeniable truth. The legend of BigFoot was real, but it was not a mindless beast. It was a sentinel, a guardian of the forest, and its appearance in the mist was both a warning and an invitation. The journey into the heart of its domain had only begun, and each step forward required patience, respect, and courage beyond what he had ever known. The forest had grown denser as Steve continued along the ridge, guided only by the fading impressions left behind in the soft, misty ground. The creature he had glimpsed in the fog seemed to have vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. Yet Steve felt its presence as tangibly as the mist curling around his boots. Every snap of a twig, every subtle rustle of leaves, reminded him that he was being observed. The footprints he had been following the day before were now faint, blurred by the morning dew and scattered moss, as if the forest itself sought to hide them from prying human eyes. Steve knelt to examine the last discernible print. It was remarkably deep, the soil compressed under the immense weight of the creature, toes splayed slightly as though testing the ground, balancing with an awareness that seemed almost intelligent. Yet, just a few steps beyond, the earth was smooth, undisturbed. The trail had ended, abruptly and inexplicably, as if the creature had stepped out of the material world entirely. Steve's mind raced. Had it climbed a steep incline so quickly that no mark remained? Or had it simply vanished, leaving him to confront the forest alone? A chill ran down his spine. The forest seemed to close in around him, the towering evergreens forming natural walls that funneled his attention to the path, or rather, the absence of a path. He felt the eyes again, the same penetrating gaze he had seen in the mist, now invisible but unmistakable. Every instinct screamed caution, yet the curiosity that had driven him this far would not allow retreat. The creature had intentionally left a trail, then erased it, as though testing his perception and resolve. Steve moved slowly, deliberately, eyes scanning the undergrowth for any sign of movement. Every detail, the angle of a broken branch, the subtle shift of moss, a disturbed patch of soil, was scrutinized for meaning. And then he noticed it. Faint indentations on a fallen log, subtle depressions in the mud, almost imperceptible disturbances that suggested not only movement but intent. The creature was still here. He could feel it, as though the very forest pulsed with its awareness. Hours passed. Steve documented everything in meticulous detail. Footprints fade into nothing. Signs of passage, subtle. Displaced branches, compressed moss. Creature demonstrates ability to move without leaving conventional trace. Movement suggests advanced awareness and adaptive behavior, likely observing and testing human presence. Evidence points to extraordinary cognitive ability. His hands trembled as he wrote, the adrenaline of the unknown mingling with awe. The deeper he ventured, the more surreal the forest became. Shadows seemed to shift independently of light. Shapes appeared at the periphery of vision, only to vanish when directly observed. Steve realized that the creature's mastery extended beyond stealth. It was part of the forest's rhythm, a living secret woven into the environment itself. The vanishing footprints were not merely concealment. They were a statement, a lesson in awareness, humility, and respect. Steve paused near a small stream, crouching low to examine the mud. He noticed faint impressions of what might have been hands, enormous, powerful, yet precise in placement. They suggested the creature had used them to steady itself as it moved, its locomotion deliberate and calculated. No ordinary animal could manipulate its environment with such subtlety. He marveled at the creature's ingenuity, realizing that every step, every movement, was part of a larger pattern, a rhythm of life in which humans were intruders. He pressed forward cautiously, tracing the almost invisible signs that the creature had left behind. Every sense was heightened. The smell of wet earth, the sound of trickling water, the slight vibration of the forest floor beneath his boots. Steve understood that the creature was aware of him, guiding him, testing his patience, perhaps even judging his intentions. The forest had become a living puzzle, and the vanishing tracks were pieces he was meant to assemble, carefully, with respect. As evening approached, Steve finally stopped to rest, leaning against a moss-covered tree. He reflected on what he had witnessed, the footprints that led him deeper into the forest, the fleeting glimpses of a massive, intelligent being. And now the vanishing trail that defied all conventional logic. He realized that the journey was not just about observation, but about understanding the presence and consciousness of a creature that had thrived for centuries beyond human detection. Steve's journal filled with his notes and sketches, but even as he recorded the details, he knew that no amount of writing could truly convey the magnitude of the experience. The vanishing footprints were more than physical evidence. They were a reminder that he was in a domain governed by rules he could barely comprehend. Respect, patience, and humility were required not just for survival, but for comprehension. By nightfall, the forest seemed to grow quieter, the wind dying down, the mist settling over the mossy floor. Steve could feel the creature still watching, somewhere beyond the trees, assessing him as he rested. Its intelligence was evident, its awareness profound, and though the footprints had vanished, the message was clear. He had been observed, tested, and permitted to continue. Steve understood, in that quiet twilight, that the BigFoot he sought was not merely a legend, nor a mindless beast. It was a guardian, a sentinel of the forest, and the vanishing tracks were its signature, subtle, elusive, and filled with meaning for those patient enough to notice. He lay down for the night, alert and reflective, aware that tomorrow would demand more courage, more observation, and a deeper understanding of the unseen life that thrived in the heart of this ancient forest. The morning sun filtered through the thick canopy, casting dappled light across the forest floor as Steve approached the river that had appeared on his map hours earlier. The water gurgled softly over smooth stones, a serene sound that belied the tension thrumming through his body. He knew instinctively that this was more than just a river. It was a place the creature he had been tracking might use as a hunting ground, a resting place, or even a vantage point. Steve moved cautiously, scanning the undergrowth along the riverbanks. His eyes caught faint signs of movement, broken branches, displaced stones, and patches of disturbed moss. The vanishing tracks from the previous day had led him here, but now the forest seemed to become almost sentient, shifting subtly as if to guide him or to test his awareness. He could feel the presence of something massive, just out of sight, watching, calculating, waiting. Then he saw it. Across the river, partially obscured by a cluster of towering ferns, stood the creature. It was enormous, its shoulders broad, fur dark and matted from the damp forest. It had paused mid-step, one massive foot lifted slightly above the ground, head turned toward him. Steve froze, heart pounding in his chest. The BigFoot, or whatever this being truly was not fleeing, nor was it aggressive. Its gaze was calm, intelligent, and profoundly aware, piercing the distance between them with an intensity that sent shivers down Steve's spine. Steve raised his camera slowly, aware that the creature could perceive his every action. Its eyes, amber and luminous in the soft morning light, held him in place. There was a clarity in that gaze, a silent acknowledgement that he had been patient, cautious, and respectful enough to be allowed this encounter. It seemed to communicate without words. "I see you. You are here, but do not overstep." The creature shifted, stepping closer to the riverbank, but carefully, deliberately, leaving no splash or sound. Steve's mind raced. This was the first time he had observed it moving freely, unmasked by shadows or mist. Every motion was precise, graceful despite the creature's enormous size. Its arms, long and powerful, swung gently at its sides, and its head turned occasionally to scan the surroundings. Steve realized that the Bigfoot was not only aware of him, but fully cognizant of the environment, moving through it with a mastery humans could scarcely imagine. He took slow, careful steps along his side of the river, trying to maintain eye contact without appearing threatening. The creature responded with subtle gestures, a slight tilt of the head, a shift in posture acknowledgments that seemed almost deliberate. Steve scribbled notes in his journal, his hands shaking from adrenaline and awe. Encounter confirmed. Creature fully aware, intelligent, and capable of complex behavior. Movements calculated and precise. Interaction appears deliberate, not random. Observation required extreme caution. Minutes passed in tense silence. The river's soft gurgle was the only sound, yet every fiber of Steve's being was alert. Then, unexpectedly, the creature approached a shallow section of the river, bending slightly to examine the water. It cupped its massive hands, touching the surface with deliberate care. The sunlight glinted off the water droplets, and Steve was struck by the creature's evident curiosity and intelligence. It was not merely a beast of legend. It was an aware, sentient being, capable of observing, understanding, and interacting with its environment in ways humans could barely grasp. Steve's mind raced with the implications. He was witnessing behavior that suggested complex thought, perhaps even planning or problem-solving. The Bigfoot did not flee at his presence, nor did it act aggressively. It simply existed in the river's edge, acknowledging him, testing him, and teaching him without a single word. He lowered his camera slightly, realizing that some moments were too profound to be captured. They had to be felt, observed, and respected. The creature's attention shifted suddenly, eyes scanning the forest behind Steve. Steve froze, understanding instinctively that he was now a participant in a silent dialogue between beings who shared no language, only awareness. The Bigfoot remained in place, then slowly began to move along the riverbank, disappearing into the undergrowth with effortless stealth. Steve followed cautiously, staying at a respectful distance, every sense attuned to the creature's presence. Hours later, the forest seemed to settle again, the river flowing peacefully, masking the echoes of what had just occurred. Steve paused, crouching beside a moss-covered boulder, and reflected on the encounter. The creature had appeared, observed, and interacted with him on its own terms, leaving a lasting impression of intelligence, patience, and awareness. He wrote in his journal, "The river encounter confirms sentience, intelligence, and deliberate interaction. Creature demonstrates awareness of environment and observer. Communication occurs through presence and movement, not sound. Profound respect required for continued observation." As dusk approached, Steve realized he had been granted a rare glimpse into a hidden world, one where humans were visitors, not masters. The Bigfoot had shown itself, but only in ways that preserved its mystery, its power, and its autonomy. The encounter at the river was a pivotal moment, reminder that the forest's guardian was alive, watching, and that every step he took from this point forward would require vigilance, respect, and courage. Steve camped nearby that night, fire crackling weakly against the cold, ever aware that somewhere beyond the riverbank, in the shadows of trees and mist, the creature remained, intelligent and aware, guiding him deeper into the forest's enigmatic heart. The forest grew darker as Steve pressed on, the canopy thickening overhead and filtering what little sunlight remained into thin green streams. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the earthy scent of moss, decaying leaves, and the faint, musky odor he had come to associate with the creature he had followed for days. Every step seemed amplified, every sound magnified, as if the forest itself were listening, observing, testing him. The footprints had disappeared completely, leaving him to navigate by intuition, by the subtle signs only someone attuned to the forest could notice. slight depressions in the moss, the way ferns bent slightly toward his path, or the faintest indentation in a fallen log. He understood that the creature's mastery of stealth was extraordinary, erasing its traces while still guiding him deeper, inviting him to follow without forcing the path. A sudden rustle to his left made Steve freeze. Shadows shifted between the trees, long and distorted in the dim light. His heart raced. He lifted his flashlight, sweeping it slowly across the dense undergrowth. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw movement, dark shapes that seemed to flit between trunks, impossible to focus on, appearing and disappearing like specters. The forest itself seemed to conspire with the creature, hiding it yet allowing glimpses that both terrified and fascinated him. Steve pressed forward, cautious and deliberate, aware that any misstep could provoke a reaction. The forest seemed alive, in a way he had not anticipated. Leaves whispered softly in the wind, branches creaked as if breathing, and shadows moved in ways that defied explanation. Every instinct told him he was not alone and that the presence nearby was no ordinary animal. The intelligence he had observed in the creature's eyes, the deliberate nature of its footprints, the calculated vanishing, they all pointed to something far more aware and ancient than any bear or human predator. As he advanced, Steve noticed subtle signs that the creature had been present recently. A large bow broken at an odd angle, a faint indentation in the mud, as if a massive hand had pressed down, and tufts of dark hair caught on a jagged branch. Each clue confirmed what he had come to believe. BigFoot was watching, guiding, and testing him in equal measure. Then, through the shifting shadows, he glimpsed it. The creature stood partially obscured by a cluster of evergreens, massive shoulders hunched, head tilted slightly as it observed him. Its eyes glowed faintly amber in the dim light, intelligent and calculating, communicating silently what words could not. It was aware of his presence, aware of his intentions, yet allowed him to witness it a delicate balance of trust and power. Steve stopped, lowering his camera, realizing that any sudden movement might startle the creature. It did not move aggressively. It simply watched, exuding an aura of quiet dominance and patience. The forest seemed to fall away around it, yet at the same time, the creature merged seamlessly with its environment, blending shadows and light in a way that made it almost ethereal. He could feel the history in its gaze, the weight of centuries it had roamed these woods, unseen by humans, surviving, thriving, and guarding its domain. Minutes passed in tense silence. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, seemed amplified, as if the forest itself was aware of the encounter. Steve noted in his journal, "Creature demonstrates advanced intelligence, strategic awareness, and environmental mastery. Blends seamlessly into forest. Observation suggests testing of human patience and caution. Respect is paramount." The creature shifted, moving silently through the shadows, disappearing behind the massive trunks of ancient trees. Steve followed at a respectful distance, careful not to make a sound. The forest seemed to tighten around him, narrowing trails, thickening underbrush, challenging his perception. Every step required focus and mindfulness, as though the forest and its guardian were teaching him lessons in humility and observation. He paused near a stream cutting through the undergrowth. In the water's reflection, he thought he glimpsed the creature moving between shadows. Almost invisible, yet unmistakable in form. The amber eyes met his in the reflection for a brief, profound moment, conveying awareness, patience, and an unspoken acknowledgement of his presence. It was not a confrontation, it was communication. Steve felt an odd mixture of fear and reverence, understanding that he had entered a realm far beyond ordinary human experience. As twilight deepened, the forest's shadows lengthened, wrapping the undergrowth in darkness. Steve set up a temporary camp, fire small but controlled, knowing the creature remained nearby, hidden but vigilant. The shadows between trees seemed to move subtly, as if alive, hinting at a presence that was always aware, always watching. He could feel the rhythm of the forest, the pulse of life that belonged not to humans, but to beings older, wiser, and more attuned to its mysteries. That night, as the fire's embers dimmed, Steve realized the forest itself was a guardian, and the creature, the elusive BigFoot, was its sentinel. Every shadow, every movement, every whisper of the wind carried meaning. The forest that hid this being had done so for centuries, and Steve had been granted only glimpses, fragments of a reality that defied understanding. He lay awake in his tent, alert and contemplative, knowing that tomorrow would push him further into the depths of the forest, deeper into the secrets it had kept hidden for generations. Dawn broke slowly over the dense forest, casting a muted glow through the thick canopy. Mist clung to the moss-covered ground, and the forest seemed to breathe with a rhythm older than human memory. Steve rose from his small camp, muscles stiff but senses alert. The events of the previous days, the footprints, the fleeting glimpses, the eyes in the mist had left him both awed and cautious. Today, however, he sensed a shift in the forest, an unspoken invitation that something profound awaited. He moved quietly along the narrow ridge, following subtle cues in the undergrowth, slightly bent ferns, displaced moss, and faint impressions in the damp soil. The creature's presence was tangible, though unseen, and Steve felt it guiding him deeper into its domain. It was as though the forest itself had taken on a consciousness, each movement deliberate, each shadow carrying a message. Suddenly, in a small clearing near a gentle stream, he saw it. The BigFoot stood partially obscured by ferns, massive and upright, with a posture that radiated intelligence and awareness. Its eyes, amber and penetrating, met his instantly. Unlike previous encounters, there was no caution or hidden movement this time. It seemed to welcome observation, acknowledging Steve's persistence and respect. Steve froze, careful to breathe slowly, feeling the weight of the creature's gaze. He lowered his camera, realizing that the moment was far too significant to capture in mere photographs. Instead, he focused on the presence before him, the silent communication, the acknowledgement that he had been seen not as a threat, but as a participant in the forest's rhythm. Minutes passed in wordless communion. Steve noticed subtle gestures, a slow turn of the head, a gentle shift of weight, the way the creature's eyes lingered on his hands and gear. There was intelligence in every movement, an awareness that extended beyond the physical. It was learning, observing, judging, and, in a way, teaching. Steve understood that he was being tested not for survival alone, but for understanding. He crouched lightly, mimicking a gesture of humility he had seen in other wildlife studies, and extended a hand toward the stream, pointing at a cluster of stones. The creature tilted its head, seemingly curious, and took a cautious step closer. Its massive frame moved with deliberate care, leaving the forest floor undisturbed, yet leaving an undeniable impression of its presence. Steve spoke softly, though he knew the creature could not understand words. "I mean no harm. I only wish to learn." The forest seemed to hold its breath. The BigFoot did not respond in sound, yet its eyes conveyed comprehension. They conveyed intelligence, patience, and a willingness to allow observation without interference. Steve realized this was not merely a predator or animal, it was a sentient guardian, fully aware of his actions and intentions. For hours, they shared the clearing. Steve observed the creature as it moved with grace and precision, touching the water, testing the stones, and occasionally glancing at him. There was a rhythm to its movements, deliberate and unhurried, that suggested planning and cognition. He noted in his journal, "Creature demonstrates advanced intelligence and situational awareness. Interaction is deliberate, guided by observation and testing. Communication occurs through presence, gesture, and awareness rather than sound. Mutual respect is essential." Steve's fear had faded, replaced by a profound sense of reverence. He understood now that the forest and its guardian were teaching him patience, humility, and the importance of observation over intrusion. The creature had chosen to reveal itself, but only in a manner that preserved its autonomy and safety. Every movement, every glance, was a lesson in understanding, a bridge between species separated by intellect and perception, yet connected by awareness. As the sun climbed higher, the BigFoot stepped back into the shadows, allowing Steve to follow at a respectful distance. Each step reinforced the lesson he had internalized. The forest was alive, sentient, and full of guardians, and his presence here demanded respect, patience, and understanding. Steve realized he had formed a fragile but profound banda, mutual understanding that transcended language, fear, and curiosity. He had glimpsed the intelligence and awareness of a being long thought mythical, and in doing so, had earned a silent trust. The forest no longer felt like an unknown wilderness. It had become a living, breathing entity, with a guardian that was both elusive and present, teaching him lessons that could only be learned through patience and observation. As he set up camp that night, Steve felt a deep sense of peace, tempered by awe. The creature had not retreated out of fear, nor had it challenged him. It had allowed him to exist alongside it, a witness to its world, a student of its quiet intelligence. For the first time, he understood that the forest was not merely habitat, it was a living classroom. And BigFoot, its silent teacher. The night descended quietly, the sounds of the forest muted but alive. Steve lay awake, reflecting on the day's encounter, knowing that tomorrow would continue this delicate balance of observation, respect, and mutual understanding. In this forest, every shadow, every rustle, and every movement held meaning, and he was beginning to see the lessons hidden within them. The forest had changed subtly over the days, yet its essence remained untouched, wild, and profoundly ancient. Steve awoke to the soft glow of dawn, mist curling around tree trunks, and a sense of quiet anticipation in the air. He had come far beyond curiosity or research. He was now a visitor in a world governed by a presence older than memory itself. The intelligence, awareness, and deliberate silence of the BigFoot he had followed were ever present, a guardian woven into the very soul of the forest. Today felt different. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the journey that had led him here. Steve traced his steps carefully, moving along paths that were barely discernible, guided by intuition honed over days of observation. Every snapped twig, every displaced stone, every subtle shift in the underbrush was meaningful. The vanishing footprints, the glowing amber eyes, the calculated movements, everything converged toward this moment. He reached a wide clearing where sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating the forest floor in golden patterns. Here, the forest seemed to open for him, revealing a space where shadows and light intertwined. And there, partially hidden yet unmistakable, stood the BigFoot. The creature's massive frame towered, its posture both regal and relaxed. It regarded Steve with the same calm, intelligent gaze that had guided him through the mist, the river, and the shadows between trees. Steve felt no fear, only awe. The creature's presence carried weight not of menace, but of authority and ancient knowledge. It was fully aware of him, and yet, it did not demand obedience or attention. Instead, it invited respect, observation, and understanding. Steve lowered his camera, sensing that some truths could not be captured, only experienced. The forest and its guardian were teaching him lessons beyond words, patience, reverence, and the delicate balance between human curiosity and natural order. The BigFoot moved gracefully through the clearing, pausing occasionally to observe Steve, as though measuring the depth of his awareness. Its amber eyes conveyed a message without sound. You have seen, you have respected, you have understood but the forest, and I endure beyond your comprehension. Steve understood that this encounter was not merely about proof or discovery. It was a communion with a being whose existence defied conventional understanding, a sentinel of a world hidden from human eyes. He stepped forward cautiously, heart pounding, and spoke softly, though he knew the creature could not hear in the conventional sense. I will respect you. I will remember this. The BigFoot tilted its head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that transcended language. Steve felt a connection, fragile yet profound, bridging the gap between species through shared awareness and mutual understanding. For hours, they remained in the clearing, observing one another, communicating silently through gesture, posture, and presence. The forest around them was alive with subtle movement, leaves drifting on the wind, birds calling softly in the distance, insects buzzing in the undergrowth. Yet the forest was also still, as if honoring the moment, preserving the mystery of a creature that had endured centuries without human interference. Eventually, the creature began to move away, gliding silently into the dense trees. Steve followed at a respectful distance, knowing he was not chasing, but witnessing a participant in a story that had unfolded over generations, unseen and uninterrupted. Every step reinforced the realization that the BigFoot was more than legend. It was an eternal presence, a guardian, a living mystery that would continue long after humans departed. Steve paused at the edge of the clearing as the creature vanished into shadow. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating faint signs of its passage. A bent fern, a disturbed patch of moss, a subtle indentation in the earth. He recorded in his journal, "The Bigfoot is not merely a creature. It is a guardian, a sentinel of the forest. Its existence transcends human understanding. Interaction is deliberate, measured, and profound. Respect, patience, and observation are required. The forest endures, and the mystery remains eternal." As dusk fell, Steve set up his final camp, reflecting on the journey. He realized that the forest and its guardian had imparted knowledge beyond facts or evidence. It was about awareness, humility, and coexistence with something far greater than himself. The Bigfoot had revealed glimpses of its world, but its full nature would remain a mystery, a legend sustained by the forest and time. That night, as embers glowed softly in the fading light, Steve gazed into the shadows between the trees, feeling the presence of the creature that had guided him, tested him, and shared silent understanding. He knew the forest would continue to guard its secrets, and the Bigfoot would remain its eternal sentinel, watching, calculating, enduring. Some mysteries are never solved, and perhaps they are not meant to be. They are meant to be respected, revered, and carried forward in memory. Steve drifted into sleep, a profound sense of awe and connection settling over him. He had come seeking evidence, but he found something far greater, an understanding of a world older, wiser, and more enduring than humanity itself. And in that knowledge, he found the eternal mystery, alive, vigilant, and untouchable, just as it had always been.